Hello, everybody, and welcome to another perspective with Tyrese Biv. And what a crazy weekend in college football, as a number of top 25 teams went down, starting on Friday night with number 2 Clemson, then number 2 Clemson, losing up at Syracuse 27-24, and then, to quote head coach Mike Leach, the pathetic front runners, Washington State, lost to Cal 37-3. Arizona State upset Washington. Auburn blew a 20-point lead to LSU. Just a crazy weekend in college football. One of the 3 non-Power 5 teams went down. San Diego State lost at home to Boise. It was just a crazy week. Michigan State wasn't the same team. They didn't close out the way they did versus Michigan the week before, but they held on to win. Michigan wasn't that impressive against Indiana. Texas Tech lost to West Virginia. Navy went down to Memphis. Just all in all, just a crazy weekend. Miami kind of had an emotional letdown after the big win against Florida State, beating Georgia Tech on a late field goal, 25-24. But just a crazy weekend to start Friday night with 2 teams in the top 10 going on the road and losing. It just opens the door. USC wasn't very impressive in their win over Utah. Sam Darnold fumbled the ball 3 times, lost 3 fumbles in that game. Also had a couple of interceptions that were dropped as well. But USC was able to fight back and win that game. Texas, at one point, was winning versus Oklahoma in the Red River Showdown. But Oklahoma came back and prevailed 29-24. So, here we are with just a couple weeks away from the first college football playoff rankings. And it's a tough one. You really, at this point, you really do not know. But what it looks like is very well it will not be multiple teams from a conference getting in. It's going to be very difficult to happen at this point. The Pac-12 could very well be left out of the college football playoff at this juncture. And I think it's crazy because at this juncture you would say the top 4 teams are probably the top 4 teams in the poll: Alabama, Penn State, Georgia, TCU. Alabama and Georgia, they're going to cancel each other out. I don't see these 2 teams, if all stays the course, colliding in the SEC championship, and then the loser still getting in to the college football playoff. That I do not see. I don't see that happening. But it leaves the door open to potentially one of them getting in, with the rest of these conferences having teams going to have multiple losses. Multiple losses. Penn State still has a tough road ahead. Michigan next week, then at Ohio State, then at Michigan State. And if they come out of that with just one loss, then they still have to play more than likely Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship. So things still a long season and a lot of games left to be played. But what a difference a week makes, where it looked like Clemson and Alabama were clearly the two best teams in the country and on the collision course for a third straight college football national championship game. And Clemson stumbles as they did a year ago. So anything can happen. As we know, still a lot of football left to be played. All of a sudden, Alabama's matchup versus LSU is a bit more intriguing. The Iron Bowl has a little bit more riding on it now, because now Auburn, sitting at 3-1 in the conference play, 5-2 overall, they need to win out to get into the SEC championship, and then probably need some help if they were to beat Alabama to get into the college football playoff. They would need a little help. They would definitely need to win the SEC championship in convincing fashion, because they would be a 2-loss conference champion, and there more than likely will be 4 other conference champions with probably just one blemish. Clemson probably won't lose again until they play in the ACC championship game against what looks like will potentially be Miami. They'll be favored the rest of the way, but they do have a tough matchup in Raleigh versus NC State, and they still have Florida State on the schedule as well. But more than likely, they'll be favored in every game. But it also has a lot to do with the health of Kelly Bryant. Kelly Bryant's health is key in Clemson's future. So it'll be interesting to see how things just continue to play themselves out. This is why college football, I know people didn't like the playoff. Some people, including myself, would like to see the playoff expanded to 8 teams. But the fact that we have this playoff now, it just opens the door for so many other teams to legitimately have a shot. The Big 12 now says that we have a legit shot to get in here, even with a one-loss conference champion, simply because they will beat up on each other. And now the Pac-12's the Pac-12 isn't as good as we thought it was. Just that plain and simple. The Pac-12 is not as good as we thought it was. Again, both teams from Washington go on the road and lose to unranked teams in Cal and Arizona State. USC was not very impressive against Utah. USC has another tough game this week as they will travel to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. Stanford, on the other hand, was impressive. And now all of a sudden, Stanford looks like they could potentially be the best team in the Pac-12 North and could go ahead and win the Pac-12 North, but they already have 2 losses themselves. And if you look at, they still have to play Washington State and Washington. Washington and Washington State still have to play each other. Washington still has to play Utah, and Washington State still has to play Utah. So you start talking about a Pac-12 champion with 2 blemishes on its resume. I don't think they look as good as a Big 12 champion with 2 blemishes on its resume, but potentially 2 wins versus quality ranked opponents. TCU still hasn't played Texas, Oklahoma, and Texas Tech. And Oklahoma and Texas Tech is on the road. Oklahoma still hasn't played Kansas State, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, TCU, and West Virginia. So there's a lot of football left to be played by all of these teams in the Big 12, but they start beating up on each other and they start getting 2 and 3 losses, and the conference champion has more than 2 losses. It opens up the door for a conference to get in multiple teams. But right now, if you were to rank the conferences, it would probably be the Big 10, 1, the SEC 2, the Big 12 3, the ACC 4, and then the Pac-12 5. It's hard to keep the Pac-12 highly rated when 2 teams ranked in the top 10. In the top 10 go on the road and score a combined 10 points. That's what Washington and Washington State did this weekend. They scored a combined 10 points. Washington State was number 8. They scored 3 points. Washington was the 5th team in